Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the opening bell. You may hear Christy huffing and panting in the background. That's just him psyching himself up for the pod. He's up for the cup this week, we can tell you. We hope you are well. We hope you had a fantastic weekend, one way or t'other. We got lots to get our teeth into as well, where we'll reflect on another British world champion. Yes, well done, Josh Kelly, finally getting to the summit after what must have seemed like an arduous physical and mental trip for that young man from the Northeast. So we'll talk about that. Josh Padley shining again, Leo Atang in action on that Northeast bill, and Teo Lopez, like so many, like all before him, succumbing to the brilliance of Shakur. Keyshawn Davis on that card as well. Nick Ball in action this weekend. Him against Figueroa. That's what they like to call a fun fight. When we say fun fight, what we mean is absolute violence from start to finish. So that'll be for after the watershed. And we're going to delve back into this week in history from 1974, where we're going to feature a fight between one of the best middleweights of all time and one of the best considered welterweights of all time, meeting in the ring inside a tent just outside Paris with Reg Guttridge, a very young Reg Guttridge on comms. Monzon, Napoles, coming up from 1974. Matthew, how do you like them apples?
I love them. I love them. What a few days it's been in the boxing world.
Yeah.
What a few days it's been in the boxing world. Super, super hectic weekend. A bit too much for me to see everything, in all honesty, but I consumed what I could and greatly enjoyed it. I think there's reasons to be cheerful. There's an awful lot going on behind the scenes. There's an awful lot of power plays kind of riding out now, but I think we're in for a really interesting year in sport boxing.
It's exactly what Andy Clark said when we had him on, wasn't it? Exactly that, when we had that Andy Clark interview just before the end of 2025, and he said 2026 is going to be fascinating, interesting. We've been saying it for the last few months as well, and it is cranking up a gear. So we're going to talk about that, particularly with relation to the Fury Makhmedov news line that came out as well. How was your weekend?
It was good. It was, I say, the evenings was largely spent watching boxing. The Sunday roast this week was a joint of pork. Wasn't so happy with my roast potatoes as I usually am. I found these new Nemo potatoes in Tesco, which have supposedly been grown purely for the purpose of roasting. But I've experimented with them a couple of times in recent weeks. And do you know what? I think I'm going to go back to the trusty King Edwards or Maris Piper for my roast moving forward. What you can't get with these Nemos is the fluff. You need that fluff. You need to be able to part boil them, shake them around, and then there's some bits that are breaking off on the side, and that gets all the lovely crispiness and that gathers all the fat when you're cooking it. But with these Nemos, I think the overriding opinion from both my daughter and my wife is that the Nemos probably taste a tiny bit better inside, but the outside is nothing compared to what I could do with a Maris Piper or a King Edward. But other than that, mate, it was a good weekend. What about you?
Next week on Christie's Cook Up, we'll be exploring how to make the perfect steak. Mine was good. Mine was really good. Hannah and I went across to Dublin for the weekend. So there's this thing called in horse racing called the Dublin Racing Festival. It's basically 2 days of top class National Hunt Jumps racing. It was supposed to be Saturday, Sunday, but the Saturday was rained off, so it ended up being on the Monday, so we missed that. So we missed the day's racing, unfortunately. But yeah, went to Dublin for the weekend, and just coincidentally, wonderfully, the way the planets aligned, but on Friday night in Dublin, Deep Dish were DJing.
Wow.
So we went clubbing. We went old school clubbing in Dublin on Friday night. In my new 70s retro top that I told you about. Oh, it was like Huggy Bear from Starsky and Hutch out on a night. with some DJ music. It was absolutely tremendous. So great top. And do you know what? Deep Dish are probably my two Canadian lads. They're two my favorite DJs, I'd say, over the last sort of 20 odd years. I saw them in London in a back in the day when Turnmills was still going, one of the best clubs. Any clubbers out there will know what I'm talking about when I say Turnmills. In London, one of absolute fire trap of a club, but one of the best clubs in London probably ever. Great club. Anyway, I saw them there. I would guess around 2001, 2002, something like that. Absolutely jam-packed. And it was good. They were in Dublin. They were tremendous. And you know why it's a good night, Matthew? Very near a single phone in sight on that dance floor. Nearly a phone in sight on the dance floor. People just living the moment, getting on with it, soaking up the music, appreciating why they're there, being together. That's what clubbing's all about. It was absolutely magical, my friend. Magical. So yeah, good weekend. Although I must have drunk 24 pints of Guinness, I think, over the weekend.
This is becoming a regular. This is becoming a regular theme at the intros of these podcasts. Is that you're drinking a ludicrous amount of pints?
Yeah,
And
I don't normally drink pints.
I think you said last week that you couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, but the racing was cancelled one day. So what are you going to do? You go on a magical mystery tour, don't you? So that was a pub crawl, and then we were at the races on the Sunday, and that ends up being a pub crawl in one pub. So yeah, it was pretty heavy on the old Guinness, but it was good weekend. Really enjoyed it. Deep dish, clubbing, fantastic. Oh, just what life's all about for me. Let's see, clubbing at its best is a microcosm of what life is or can be. That kind of people appreciating each other, the bond between them, whatever it is. In that case, it's just the music. In day-to-day life, it's something else. Soul, the universe, whatever it is. But yeah, so clubbing is life perfection at its very best. Right, let's talk about the news lines, Matthew. Fury Makhmudov. When that name came out, Makhmudov, I mean, it's a great fit for Fury, isn't it? What did you make of him as an opponent before we move on to all of the various strands? And they are many.
Yeah, I mean, Makhmudov has always kind of been the name in the background. I think before Fury had even confirmed that he was coming back, there was whispers that Makhmudov was being lined up for Tyson Fury. I think the fact that he kind of enhanced his profile on UK shores by beating Dave Allen at the end of last year will probably have helped the marketability of the fight taking place in the UK. We know what Makhmudov looks like. He's this big ogre of a man who does look quite simply terrifying. I've seen him in the flesh more than once, and he is an imposing figure. They will build it up as a really tough fight for Tyson Fury to come back to. But Makhmudov, on the two occasions where he's kind of stepped up in class, he's been exposed. And I think even if Tyson Fury has declined slightly, which I would expect him to from the last time we saw him in the ring, he should still be far too clever for Makhmudov and get the job done. Whether it's going to be an absolute thriller is up for debate, but it's going to be seen by an awful lot of people. I mean, the Tyson Fury comeback is going to be on Netflix, which I think is a really interesting development. Tyson Fury obviously very proud and over the moon with that. He's got history with Netflix, with that Home with the Furies, which wasn't particularly my cup of tea, but it certainly allowed him to kind of almost transcend his sport and bring in a whole new eyes to the Tyson Fury story. They're going to run another series of that, which will please some people. And I think they've also got a Fury no holds barred one-off documentary plan for Netflix as well, just to coincide with this whole comeback story. But very clearly, this is just the start. Makhmudov isn't a one-off event. He's looking to be active in 2026. But again, we don't know what he's going to look like. I know he's doing what he did before. He's showing us all that he's running. He's showing us all that he's losing weight and he's committed to the cause and it's given him a new lease of life. But just because they had that effect in, 2018, doesn't mean that he'll be able to do exactly the same in 2026 and come back and surprise everybody. So we wait and see. We have to remember that he's 37 years old and we have to remember the life that he's led to this point.
Indeed. And we have to remember that at his age, he's been out for more than a year as well. In fact, by the time he comes back in April, that'll have been, what, 16 months or something like that he's been out of the ring?
Yeah, it will be. It's not his longest layoff. I think the longest one, I think it's his third longest layoff. Some of them have been due to him retiring. One of them was due to the longest one, obviously, was after he'd beaten Vladimir Klitschko in one of the best wins of his career. And then he was made to answer to certain charges in regard to failing drug tests, and into a depression he fell. After that, he had a long layoff between Deontay Wilder 2 and Deontay Wilder 3. That was largely pandemic related. So he's no stranger to a layoff. Even earlier in his career, he was off for the best part of 12 months and came back. So whether that will necessarily hinder him, I don't know. But I do think that we have to be realistic about his age. But fighters do tend to be going on longer than they ever have. But in the heavyweight division, it wasn't so long ago that 37 was the age of the oldest ever heavyweight champion, and that was Joe Walcott, until George Foreman beat that record in 1994. So generally, when former heavyweight champions come back at the age of 37, it doesn't end well for them. I'm not saying that's going to be the case here, but it's always worth looking into history to get some lessons from it.
What are the relationships here as well? Who is aligned with that? So you've got Netflix involved, Fury involved. Fury has, of course, had, I think, a fairly genuine relationship in and out of the ring with Frank Warren and Queensberry since his renaissance in 2018. So who are the people that are aligned with Fury on this march?
Well, it was really interesting. I thought the announcement shortly after Tyson Fury kind of made the announcement, Netflix made the announcement. There was a message from Frank Warren's Twitter account, which I think we can all agree, probably Frank Warren isn't the person who's composing those messages, but it was very much a message of support as opposed to a message of control. It was, we support Tyson Fury and he's going to come back and he's going to be great and he's going to surprise everybody again, but there wasn't any kind of sense of ownership about the actual event. So we wait and see. I'm sure Queensberry will be involved. And Zuffa Boxing, who spoke to Lance Pugmire over the weekend, you know, they're going to be involved in the Tyson Fury combat. They've got one eye on potentially Anthony Joshua coming back and Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua performing on Netflix. Joshua, of course, has got the reputation with the Netflix because his last fight against Jake Paul was on there. But how all of this will sit with the likes of Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn remains to be seen. And this is what I said at the top. There's an awful lot of power plays kind of starting to infiltrate old relationships. So we wait and see what happens. I think it's great. I'm really interested to see how it all pans out.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It is slightly concerning to an extent as well, although as a fan, if the fights are getting made, you might not bother which particular platform they're on as long as they're getting made and you're getting a chance to see your inverted commas favorite fighters. So yeah, that all of that may just be absolutely fine for fans, but there's politicking going on. There's going to be some personal and professional relationships tested to the absolute limit, Matt. I think it's fair to say in the coming months. Is this further evidence of what you said last week? Whether it's a practical realization that what it is, the battle plan that was being suggested by Zuffa, TKO, etc., that maybe actually there needs to be another element, a different look, a different feel, a different content to how it is that they want to go about it. In other words, like you said last week, an understanding and a realization, an admission that they need some of the established stars to lend their weight to what it is that they want to do. And therefore, what it is that they were saying they were going to do isn't necessarily what we're going to see.
I suppose the word aggressive might be a little too strong, but they've come into boxing. They've had those two shows, which is kind of their league type format. We still haven't seen any evidence of a league or a league table or a fixture list, but it does seem to be kind of fringe type fighters coming together in 10-round bouts, and some of them have been really good, and I think that format will work. But ultimately, that isn't necessarily going to move the dial. I mean, this is something that Pro Box have been doing for a long time. Is kind of that level of boxing, and it's drawn a lot of eyes on YouTube for Pro Box. Pro Box have had a lot of success with it, but it hasn't taken Pro Box to the next level. So I think that Zuffa have probably realised that as good as the boxing is, you're not going to get millions and millions and millions of people unless you have the names, unless you have that. I think the issue is, as with anybody that comes into the sport, is they'll make certain promises and then they have to tweak or completely break those promises. So the kind of narrative that the sanctioning body titles don't matter, then there's the signing of JR Pataya, and he's saying all I want is the undisputed title. But interestingly, I think over a period of time, what will be tested is the appeal of those sanctioning bodies. Because ultimately, I think what we will find out is, yes, of course, a fighter wants to win a sanctioning body title. But if the offer is, say, 200,000 to fight for a sanctioning body title, or $1 million to fight in a fight that hasn't got a sanctioning body title or has got a new Zuffa title, they're going to go where the money is. I don't think that the sanctioning bodies should necessarily rest on their laurels. A lot of them are kind of playing this game saying, look, we're part of boxing. Boxing needs sanctioning body titles. The fighters, first and foremost, will look at the bottom line and see what they're getting paid, and they will head to the highest bidder with or without a belt on the line.
And therefore, is there a chance that, and I said these personal and professional relationships, whether it's Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, Tyson Fury, for example, is there a chance that the established stars, in particular, because they're the cash cows and they're the calling cards for everyone, is there a chance that those kinds of people, like your AJs, like your Furies, like your Canelos, for example, although Canelo has got some kind of contractual relationship with Saudi Arabia, is there a chance that those people will become a little bit more free market, self-determining, movable feasts in a sense? Will they be going here, there, and everywhere from time to time, from fight to fight, seeking what might just be the best platform, the best exposure, and the most money for them? Could we see that kind of slightly more chaotic look for the foreseeable?
Yeah, I've long said that that's the case, and you could even date it back to kind of the likes of Oscar De La Hoya and Floyd Mayweather breaking free from big money contracts with the biggest promoters in the world to essentially kind of to tread their own path and earn the most money that they possibly could. But you have to be at a certain level before you can do that. So you can't be on your way up and just say, no, I'm gonna go over here, then I'm gonna go over there. I think that, yes, someone the status of an Anthony Joshua, although I think Anthony Joshua is probably an anomaly in this. I think out of all of these names that you're mentioning, I would be astonished if Anthony Joshua at this stage of his career turned his back and just said, Eddie Hearn, I don't want to work with you anymore because I'm getting more money elsewhere. I think whoever Joshua works with, Eddie Hearn will be alongside him in some way, shape or form. But I do think largely that level of fighter, because it's quite rare for a fighter to go through their entire career who is the level of Joshua and remain loyal to one promoter, which is what Joshua's done. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another one. So someone like a Canelo, for example, who for a period of years now has been going from one promoter to another or one broadcaster to another, wherever the best deal is, I think it makes sense for them to do that. Why wouldn't they? The landscape is so fractured and there's so many different avenues for them to choose. Why wouldn't they choose the avenue where they're going to earn the most money and get the most exposure and get the most rewards and look after their future in the best possible way? Why wouldn't they do that? And why shouldn't they do that? So yes, I most certainly think that we will see more of that in the future.
And therefore, to counter that, do you think we might see some of the big promoters looking to, in a sense, UFC it by tying either the established stars or the next would-be stars down to 3, 4, 5 fight, slightly mid-term stroke longer term deals?
Yeah, you may do. I mean, again, that's nothing new. I mean, we had the interesting article that was published by The Guardian that Thomas Hauser authored in the last week, didn't he? Where Hauser just really drilled down into, he'd seen the fighters' contracts that are being kind of thrown around to the fighters interested in fighting for Zuffa, and there's quite a few things in there that are concerning. And I think critics of what Zuffa are trying to do will latch on to all of those concerning things that are in those contracts. I think the flip side of it is that they're in those contracts and they're black and white, and every single fighter that wants to sign them can see them. They're all adults, and ultimately, this is something that we've seen from day dot in boxing, is that a fighter can be warned about all sorts of dangers, whether it's inside the ring, whether it's in a contract. They will always think that they're going to be good enough and that they will always come through. They will always kind of bet on themselves. They will think that nothing's going to happen to them inside the ring. They'll think that their prowess will stop them from meeting any hiccups within contracts in the future. So ultimately, there's only so much you can do when these boxers have got all of this in black and white in front of them. They're always going to bet on themselves. And that really kind of, for me, is, yeah, some of these things are quite troubling in these contracts, in that if Zuffa all of a sudden kind of decide that they're not interested in a certain fighter, they can pitch them in with someone that's a lot better than them. And therefore, essentially, that contract will all of a sudden come to an end. I mean, that's not great. That's a bit of skullduggery behind the scenes, isn't it? But ultimately, the boxer is completely aware of it before they should be. The boxer is completely aware of all of this before they enter into a contract with them.
We'll put that Thomas Hauser Guardian into article. We'll put a link up to that on the pod description. So look out for that. I'll get Matt to add that to the pod description for you this week, and you can go and read the content of that, what it's getting at. Really interesting piece it is as well. So you can go and look at that. Final question then, Matt, just on this particular sequence. Do you think, therefore, that Fury Makhmudov, and if sort of Zuffa Netflix are moving towards Fury AJ later in the year, do you think Queensberry stroke Matchroom will be attached to those in their own ways, with their own relationships, getting their 10% or whatever?
I mean, one would presume so. I mean, I noticed that Queensberry have attached themselves, at least as a name on the poster, of Deontay Wilder, Derek Chisora. When we spoke about all of that last week, in that Chisora was kind of looking to move on, and Queensberry was saying, well, you've signed a contract, pal. So Queensberry have attached themselves to that. Whether it will be a similar thing there, what I don't know and have no idea about, and haven't spoke to anybody about, is what Tyson Fury's contract looked like when he was with Queensberry. So I don't know, but I would imagine that they will be involved. And as I said before, in regards, should Anthony Joshua decide to fight again as well, this is all very, very premature. You know, people are kind of jumping the gun a little bit about what Anthony Joshua is going to do with his future. Quite rightly, he's taking his time and deciding and taking some time away. Everything that happened to him, the awful things that happened to him, are still exceptionally fresh. So whether he sees his future in the ring, we don't yet know. But should he decide to continue, and there is Netflix at play and the Zuffa at play that are kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes, I would fully expect Eddie Hearn to be involved with that. And Eddie Hearn recently, despite everything that he said, he's kind of coming out and saying, you know, give me a challenge. This is rubbish. This is just 10-round fights. It's my understanding that he's also reached out to Dana White in the last few days and asked to have a sit-down meeting with him to see how they can work together. And ultimately, that is the way that I think it will have to be if everything is going to work. You simply can't have one person coming in, or one entity, or one organization, or one promotional group coming in and saying we're going to completely take over, because there are so many in existence that are influential and are powerful and have got quite substantial roots in the sport. So I think the need to work together, which is something that I've most certainly said for as long as I've been working in boxing, remains as prevalent today as it always has.
Yeah, you have to feel that the various sort of spats over the years between sort of Al Heyman, Top Rank, Golden Boy, Oscar, ongoing now with Dana White, you have to feel that all of that infighting has harmed the sport on that side of the Atlantic. You have to feel that. And although there's different things at play at the moment, you know, Bob Arum's getting on. Top Rank have lost their kind of ESPN deal, and now Paramount are involved, and now Zuffa are involved, and so obviously the landscape is changing. But you have to feel, Matt, that there is a fallout from all of that stuff that has evolved between all of them and some of the bit players and some of those that are no longer there, and HBO and Showtime no longer there as well. You have to feel there's an element of fallout from all of that over the years.
Yeah, there is, and I think you can point to what's happening in America at the moment, where it appears that there is this situation where you're going to have Zuffa on one side and everyone else on the other. But I think you only have to look at what was going on in the UK not so long ago. And I used to get tired of writing about it when I was at Boxing News. Is just the constant battle between Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn. And I used to make the point that it is not helped by the kind of current YouTube generation of media, in that the people that were representing YouTube channels would quite rightly recognise what would make a headline, what would make people click, and it's so that you've got them on you've got one day going up saying, Eddie Hearn, did you hear what Frank Warren said about you? And then the next day going to Frank Warren saying, Frank, did you hear what Eddie Hearn said about you? And all of a sudden, these are all out there. These videos are out there with Eddie Hearn bad-mouthing Frank Warren and vice versa. And there's zero chance of them working together. And that used to drive significant obstacles into the landscape. And along came Turki Alalshikh, and we did see for a period Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn holding hands, supposedly the best of friends. I don't think they're quite as close now as they were then, as things have started to change in the boxing landscape. But what we did see for a period of time was a series of fights being made with promoters working together, and they were largely fights that we'd wanted to see for a long time. And that is the only way you're gonna get those fights, is if you have supposed rivals working together. So we'll see. We'll see. The problem is, a problem is the size of these egos that we're talking about. They have all got gargantuan egos, where deep down, ultimately, they want to be top dog.
Probably that. I think it's naive and small-minded, personally. And even when I was at Box Nation, so I was aligned, working alongside Frank Warren and his team. I always hated that stuff. I always thought it was so childish. I hated it, absolutely hated it, and I don't feel any different now about it. Not one bit do I feel different about it now.
This is something else to remember, and this is something else to think about. So you can kind of see this divide coming: Zuffa versus everybody else. But the thing to consider, if everybody else has aligned themselves on the other side, and by that I mean you can have them all kind of on DAZN, you're going to have a lot of unrest on that one side, particularly from people like Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, I think, where they have for a long time been trying to make the fights when they want to make them. They've got dates, certain dates that they'll have in mind. All of a sudden, they'll be having to kind of divvy the dates out. You can't be having everything on. You can't have having things on at the same time on the same Saturday night, for example. So you can have all of these different promotional groups all battling for space on DAZN, and on the other side, they've got completely free reign.
Absolutely. And it can't be an absolute given that DAZN as a business can continue to lose billions of dollars. I mean,
of course it can't.
It seems unthinkable, really. But there they go. There they go. So, yes, as we said before, 2026, funky, folks. Funky. Very, very funky. So we'll see how that unfolds. And we're going to have two big heavyweight fights within the space of a week, aren't we? Because Fury Makhmudov on Netflix in April on the 11th. And the week before in London at the O2, Wilder against Chisora Wilder. They kicked off their promotional tour in New York this week. They're going to be in London following that in successive days. So you'll be able to follow all of that. And a week or so before that, you've got Fundora against Thurman finally on. That's March the 28th. So a couple of other news lines unfolding, particularly in the heavyweight division and particularly surrounding boxing, where it is viewed, who is promoting it, and who the power brokers are that are calling the shots. Those are all the things that are really going to take off in the spring and into the summer of this year. Josh Kelly's career finally getting the kind of take off and lift off and payoff that he has long since hoped, if not necessarily, Matt, always believed, but there was more than just hope. There was genuine belief in the way that he delivered at the weekend. The performance and the style of it wouldn't have been to everyone's taste. I suspect Turki Alalshikh, who was watching Shakur ringside, would have had plenty of food for thought over the weekend. Some of the sort of marquee standout win performances from Shakur and Kelly in particular. But he stuck to his game plan despite a big bump in the road en route, Matt. And that's kind of a motif for Josh Kelly's career, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, I'm not sure if we spoke about it last week. I was certainly speaking about it to several people, is that, and I think Adam Booth himself said it. He said, after Saturday night, people are going to stop asking Josh Kelly about David Avanesian. It's always on, when you speak to Josh Kelly, it's always on your list of questions, isn't it? What happened against David Avanesian? And people were constantly, that was all the evidence they needed, that Josh Kelly, when he went in a world title fight or against somebody like Murtazaliev, that he would capitulate at some point. It would all just get too much for him and he'd turn around and he wouldn't be able to continue. And Adam Booth made the point when he was in conversation with Tris Dixon. He's, look, almost kind of went through this kind of thing before with David Haye and Carl Thompson. All David Haye was being asked about until he won the cruiserweight world title was losing to Carl Thompson. And all of a sudden that stopped. He rules at cruiserweight. Nobody mentions Carl Thompson again. And I hope that is the case with Josh Kelly. I did see some criticism of Josh Kelly's performance, largely with a few voices that I'm familiar with out in America on Twitter that were critical of the way that he fought. Not sure if that is worthy. Okay, it wasn't edgy as see, exciting, breathtaking stuff. But you've got to win the fight. You've got to win the fight. You've got to recognise where you might fall down, and you've got to recognise what your advantages are. And if being on your bike and moving and countering and then getting back on your bike and everything else is how it's going to work. Because if you go to someone like Murtazaliev in straight lines, he's going to take your head off. Kelly knew he couldn't do that. And I think the biggest concern probably for British fans would have been when he went down in the 9th. And then you're starting to fear that this is where it all starts to unravel. This is where it all starts to fall apart. Full credit to Josh Kelly, in my opinion, for getting the job done against a fighter that probably 90% of people thought was going to beat him. There were a few whispers behind the scenes last week that Kelly was right. And you could see it in his demeanour as well. You could see it in his demeanour in the days leading up to the fight, the way he was at the weigh-in. There wasn't a hint of anxiety or nervousness there. He just wanted to get in the ring and show everybody what he's about. And I think he did. No, it wasn't kind of this virtuoso kind of coming out moment where Josh Kelly signals he's one of the biggest stars in the sport. But it was a really mature and intelligent display to beat a current world titleist. So not many fighters can say they've done that. Now Josh Kelly can.
Indeed. Yeah, and winning a significant belt against one of the established guys who'd, in his 30s, bit one-dimensional, but certainly beatable. But it took just about everything to be in place for Josh Kelly to beat him on the night. And even then, it was pretty competitive, wasn't it, on the cards as well. I do understand. I do understand why there will be criticism, Matt. I'm not saying I'm delivering that, but I can understand why. And if you're going to do a sort of like for like comparison, and you look at the way Shakur boxes at the weekend against Teofimo Lopez, and you look at the way Josh Kelly boxes against Murtazaliev, the difference in the movement is stark, isn't it? stark. So I do understand why there will be people who watched that and thought, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of backwards movement. So there will be people that sort of criticize. Do you I suppose to sort of head that off, do you think that's the way that Josh Kelly had to box on the night against that guy, or do you think it's part of his makeup going forward, and that's kind of part of his style?
I think it's the way that he had to box on the night. I think it's the way that he was told would win him the fight. And I think he followed that plan more or less to the letter. There was the odd little mistake. But I think he did what he had to do to win that fight. I think we've seen him in recent fights. There are times where you're not guaranteed a long period on the edge of your seat when Josh Kelly fights. Let's be honest about that. But we have seen him stand and fight when he's had to stand and fight. We saw him beat Troy Williamson, kind of doing that. And that was a more fan-friendly affair, I thought, when he beat Troy Williamson. But Kelly's doing what he needs to do to win. Very talented boxer, very, very, very talented. Don't think he's the best in the 154-pound weight class. I don't think he's the best in the world. I'm not saying that, but he did what he had to do, and I'm sure whoever he comes up against next, they'll come up with a game plan where they feel they give themselves the best chance of victory. But I think if you look at kind of Josh Kelly and then you look at someone like Boots Ennis, or you look at Virgil Ortiz, you think, well, they might just be a step too far for him. But he's put himself on that level. He's put himself in and amongst that company. And I'd like to see him fight those kind of guys next, presuming, of course, that we don't get Ortiz Ennis, which is dragging on and on and on and on.
Indeed. And whether the money's there to make that fight, as you said last week, there's a new name in that division as well, because Xander Zayas beat Abbas Barao, didn't he? Very narrowly at the weekend as well. So he's another tight list. So theoretically, there could be that. That would be whether it's the easiest to make, is certainly the easiest route to hanging on to your title. I think it's fair to say, and that is very fair to say that right here, right now. So Xander Zayas, another kind of name in the mix, and I think you have to use the tools that you've got. I mean, let's compare it to Sonny Edwards, for example. And I used to say, in a way, that there was something marvelous about Sonny Edwards, who, might not have the punch. So you have to find the tools in a very, 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 very violent sport. You have to find the tools that best suit you to navigate difficult times, choppy waters, facing off against more violent men than you, or women. You have to use what you've got. And Sonny Edwards did absolutely. He maxed out in using all of his skills and footwork. And I think if it's okay for Sonny Edwards, then it's okay for Josh Kelly.
Yeah, you have to do what you need to do to win the fight, don't you?
And it takes, I'll tell you what, Matt, it takes the discipline. As I say, I totally understand any criticism or just fair analysis of the performance, the style, etc., the method, the manner, all of that. Totally understand it. It takes a lot of discipline, concentration, focus, again and again and again to do that against someone like Murtazaliev, who might not be the best, the most talented, but punches hard and is in your face and is providing pressure all the way throughout. So it does take something pretty unique in terms of discipline and shape and focus and desire, a certain quiet intensity, all of that through the 12 rounds.
Of course it does. And you also have to consider that might be just what Josh Kelly needs to go to the next level. There might be more gears that Josh Kelly can utilize as he moves forward. And even though he was confident, and even though there's been a marked change in him psychologically over the last few years, there still must have been something at the very, very back of his mind, just wondering if he actually did have what it takes to kind of get over the line in a fight like that. Now he's got that confirmation himself. There might be further improvement from Josh Kelly. I think it's exactly what he needed. I think it was a job expertly done. No, it wasn't the fight of the year. No, it wasn't the performance of the year. No, he hasn't necessarily arrived as the star in the junior middleweight division, but he's most certainly put himself on the map in a way that he wasn't this time last week.
Josh Padley did so with a storming second round victory to win the European super featherweight title. So he'll be keeping an eye on sort of Lee Wood, Josh Warrington, which is coming up in a few weeks' time. He looks like he can probably get himself into the big fights if those big fights are still there for him by the time he's kind of ready, and he's becoming ready, isn't he? Leo Atang winning at the weekend as well. And stateside, Matt, Shakur, so good. So good. I mean, he can just shut you down. It's when you see other good fighters, you know, world champions like Teo Lopez, when you see them, this is how you know how outstanding another fighter is when you see a really good operator falling over their front foot, can't get their feet quick enough to close the gap. I mean, he was just put in his place and shut down Teo Lopez, wasn't he? Again, it wasn't edge of the seat stuff. The skirmishes were few and far between. I suspect, again, a bit like the Josh Kelly performance, there'll be some who criticise, or maybe more fans who just think, can you do more, Shakur? Can you do more? Because in your own way, you are so good, so dominant, and so expert at just shutting down quality fighters. Can you go through the gears? Do you have other gears? Can you really, really just provide those defining moments besides just winning defining fights?
I think he can. I think he's got more. I think he's got more in his locker. I really do. And I thought it, as I was watching that fight throughout, I thought you are kind of cruising here and you are keeping someone like Teofimo Lopez in check. There's no need for him to do any more. It's not in his makeup to kind of do any more, which can be frustrating when you're a fan of a bloodthirsty persuasion. But I thought Stevenson was exceptional throughout that fight. I really did. And whilst writing the preview for Boxing Scene beforehand, I said there is potential here at last for someone to step forward. There's been loads of names like your Devin Haney's, your Ryan Garcia's, your Tank Davis, your Teofimo Lopez, and your Shakur Stevenson. There's potential here for him to step forward as the leader of that pack. And perhaps America might have someone like a new Floyd Mayweather on their hands. Now, I know that Stevenson hasn't come a lot. Stevenson is far more comparable to late Floyd Mayweather than early Floyd Mayweather. But he has kind of the braggadocious tongue. He has the supreme talent level. Now it's whether or not he can go on and generate the kind of marketability and the interest that Floyd Mayweather managed to. But I thought Stevenson was excellent. And I thought maybe it could have been more exciting, but he just had Teofimo Lopez eating out the palm of his hand. Lopez could not do a thing about it. Lopez is a really good fighter as well, a really, really good fighter. And there was talk last week, wasn't there, Stephen say, well, I don't know, I'm going to hang around at junior welterweight, or I'll go back down to lightweight. If you look at junior welter, whether it's junior welter, light welter, super lightweight, this is another thing, isn't it, with boxing? Can we not just call it this? Can everybody not just call it the same division to save any confusion? Another thing that drives me round the bend. But anyway, I'm going to call it junior welterweight because I'm working for Boxing Scene predominantly, and that's how we do it in America. Junior welterweight division. You look at the junior welterweight division where Stevenson is now top of the pile. And you've got Dalton Smith and Keyshawn Davis and Richardson Hitchens and Adam Azim on the way up. To all of these people, your Eddie Hearns, your Dana Whites, your Frank Warren, your Oscar De La Hoyas, your Bob Arams that are going to come in and kind of take over the sport, all work together and focus on that division. This is for me. Remember when we had the lightweight, there were going to be the next lot of the lightweight, the Fantastic Four, and barely any fights materialized. We have got 4 unbeaten fighters at the top of that division with others coming through where they should all be fighting each other. And all of a sudden, there will be serious interest in that. This is where we should be focused. All of a sudden, this division is one of the hottest in the sport, and it's got some real talent. Can you imagine Keyshawn Davis versus Shakur Stevenson? I thought Davis looked brilliant on the undercard at the weekend. Throw Dalton Smith into the mix. Adam Azim, another couple of seasoning fights, throw him into the mix. And you've got something really, really enticing there. And we've had this so many times in the sport of boxing where you will identify a division that is talent-laden. And the most obvious thing in the world is to just match them against each other. Yet we never have. Well, given all of this money that's supposedly there and all of this influence that is supposedly there and all of these platforms that are now there, show us what you can do with this lot.
And it's such a shame that Tank Davis has self-combusted. He was finally arrested in Miami, wasn't he, in the last week or so, because Tank against Shakur, it just in terms of talent, is just about the best fight you could make in boxing, isn't it? And even allowing for boxing's history, and we're going to be speaking about Carlos Monzon, who, you know, throughout his life had been accused of domestic violence repeatedly, and finally he did kill his second wife, didn't he? In the late 80s. So boxing's association with men who are violent and have poor personal reputations and records, but it's not always stopped them re-associating themselves with the sport. But anyway, we'll see about that. But yeah, Tank against Shakur would have been one of the best fights that you can make. But now Keyshawn Davis, after his performance of the weekend, if Shakur's going to stay at 140, the moves he's made in a short space of time does underline that all those people like Mike Costello, who have always been hot on Keyshawn Davis, they were right. He's got real control, hasn't he? Real technique and technical control and mastery of the ring. Might turn out to be a bit of a cagey chess match, Shakur, Keyshawn. I think Tank Shakur probably would be the same. But in terms of the talents, absolute pure talent and technique, right now, they're two of the best.
They are. And Keyshawn kind of reminds me a little bit of a younger Mayweather. Stevenson reminds me of a young old Mayweather, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas Keyshawn has got flashes of the young Mayweather, and it's quite natural that these guys, when they were just starting out, who would have been at the top? Who would have been at the top of the sport? Who would have they always had one eye on? Who would they look forward to? Who would they draw inspiration from? It's Floyd Mayweather, and you can see it in both of them, and that's no bad thing. Now, I'm not Floyd Mayweather's biggest fan necessarily, but inside that ring, he was a genius. He was a magician. And I think you're seeing that. But Davis, he has got, like I say, he's just got a bit of that spite about him. And the fact that he was still going for that knockout in the 11th and 12th round against Ortiz, and he got it in the 12th, some really hurtful body shots going in that just took all of the ambition and breath away from Ortiz that late in the fight. I thought was a statement that we should take notice of.
Although talk that he's moving up to 147 sooner rather than later. But anyway, they're probably close enough. He'd be the more natural, bigger fighter, Keyshawn Davis, wouldn't he, than Shakur. How do you feel about this weekend in Liverpool? Nick Ball taking on Brandon Figueroa. I mean, both not really big fans of taking a backward step. Nick Ball, who's an absolute pocket rocket, isn't he? He's not turbocharged. Nick Ball. I mean, I think he would get found out by an Inoue type of fighter, precise puncher who can just pick him off on the way in. But obviously that would be if Inoue moved up to featherweight. Brandon Figueroa is hittable, and he's not quite as quick as Nick Ball, but he can take a shot and he can work at a high pace. I don't know who's going to be forced to take the back foot. I suspect it's probably Figueroa, isn't it, Matt?
You suspect that. I still think this is the most difficult fight of Nick Ball's career, to be honest, to date. It wouldn't surprise me to see Figueroa to win this one. We kind of think back to kind of Paul Hodgkinson, don't you? From Liverpool back in the day, a featherweight, and kind of all of a sudden coming up against somebody and losing his title when we didn't expect it. I'm not predicting that kind of outcome necessarily here, but I think Nick Bull might have to be better than we've seen him before to win this. And I'm not saying he can't be. Figueroa, you would think, is the kind of fighter that would allow Nick Bull to showcase the best of himself. But he could end up in the kind of firefight that he's just never experienced before. He might encounter someone who can make him take a backward step. It's a difficult one. I haven't been in the laboratory for this one, to be honest. But my instinct when it was made was just slightly leaning towards the youth and exuberance of Nick Bull, but with a massive caveat that this might just be a step too far.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a wicked fight. I do. I think it'll be a wicked fight to watch at the weekend. I think Nick Bull's quicker, faster. I think he'll beat Figueroa to the punch. Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be shocked if he beat him to the punch and put him down and managed to get him out of there. But if Figueroa can get, if it does end up being an absolute war, Figueroa can take a shot. If he can get into the second half of the fight, then I think Figueroa could come up in this one. He can, but I suspect Bull will be too quick, beat him to the punch, and might just get first run on him repeatedly, again and again and again. But Figueroa is so tough. I mean, he looks so slow and beatable, but he is hard. He can fight at a pace. He can come back. He's the kind of fighter who can take it and dish it out. You know, only Stephen Fulton's the only guy who's beaten him in his career. So, and he's used to these hard fights, Matt, isn't he? He's used to pressure. He's used to hard fights. He can take it. So I'm really intrigued. I think it's a cracker of a fight.
So do I. I think it's terrific. I think it's almost kind of going under the radar a little bit. It is really good. Figueroa is kind of used to, as you say correctly, Figueroa is used to this kind of high intensity warfare, and he's come out on top every single time he's been involved in it. It was a different fight against someone like Stephen Fulton. And Nick Bull doesn't fight anything like Stephen Fulton. And you do just wonder if Figueroa kind of battle hardened, and I know that Nick Bull is a tough little pocket rocket, but he might be about to encounter the kind of fight that he's never encountered before. And he might come out of it with flying colours. But it's a really tough one for him.
It's a good fight. It's a good fight. The fact that Figueroa is so sort of tall and long might just help Nick Bull as well.
Yeah, it might. And all of that we've said about Figueroa as well, just because he's used to tough, hard fights. One day, all of a sudden, that tough, hard fight just becomes too much. And, you know, for all we know, Figueroa might be overrun in 7 or 8 rounds here. It might just be one fight too many for him. So we wait and see. But, yeah, absolute cracker.
Coming up this weekend, Figueroa, by the way, 3-1 against for this one. If you're looking at the bookies' odds, Nick Bull is a 1-3 or shorter odds on favourite. That's coming up this weekend. Next up, into the history books with this week. And this week, we take you back to the 9th of February, 1974, inside a circus tent in Paris, on the outskirts of the French capital. And the reigning middleweight champion against the reigning welterweight champion and long-standing champions, the pair of them as well. Carlos Monzon against Jose Napoles. 94th fight from Monzon. And would it be 83rd for Jose Napoles? Plenty of experience and caliber coming into this one. Napoles stepping up in weight, Matt, but I mean, really, he was fighting it under light middle, wasn't he? Never mind middleweight. Came in at 153 pounds or thereabouts, and Monzon just under the 160 middleweight limit. Yeah,
and it was a different time, wasn't it? I mean, the junior middle / light middleweight division was established at this point, but it was often kind of stepped over. It wasn't the division that it is today. And this was the same day weigh-in. And what you did see ultimately was 2 high-level fighters. One of them was taller, longer, heavier, and kind of showed why weight classes do exist. Napoles couldn't. He had moments of success, didn't he? Early on, I thought he was good. There was round 4, he was decent, still quite sprightly until the 6th, but he was always having to do things that would leave him open to someone as precise as Carlos Monzon, just to get over the reach advantages and the size advantages. Napoles had to be kind of uncharacteristically careless almost in order to try and just make a dent in the bigger man. But you can imagine it at the time. You could tell by the way that Reg Gutteridge was kind of building the fight up. And he was doing, I think he was doing commentary for kind of closed circuit coverage in America and Canada, wasn't he? He didn't mention the UK. That it was a fight between two of the best fighters out there. I think at one point he says that Napoles and Monzon are two of the best fighters in history. And here they are in the same ring. So this was a very much anticipated fight. And I say this every time because I love my kind of modern history, and I love imagining what life was like at certain points in history and certain places in history. In the mid-1970s, in the middle of Paris, and you can see all the beautiful French actresses kind of at ringside, and you just think, oh, God, can I just have a few days there, please? I'd love to experience that. I'd love to experience mid-70s Paris.
Oh, what a time to be alive. And I know there's certain aspects of sort of boxing promotion and theatre that you couldn't necessarily do these days, because it just takes up too much time, and we're supposed to be sensitive to that. It doesn't always seem it when you go to some shows, but they chose the gloves in the ring. The choice of gloves laid out on a couple of towels in the center of the ring, and the fighters and their teams went in to choose their gloves in the middle of the ring. And then they have a series of sort of fighters and celebrities coming into the ring as well. George Carpentier, the world light heavyweight champion. He was a European heavyweight champion as well. Fought Dempsey and several other big names, didn't he? Almost more famous in defeat than he was in victory, Georges Carpentier. But he was introduced to the crowd, Matt. He actually would die the following year. So in 1975, he died of a heart attack, but here he is in the early 1974, being introduced to the crowd, as well as Joe Bugner in there as well. He'd be European heavyweight champion, Joe Bugner, Nino Benvenuti, all introduced to the crowd on the night.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. They don't really do that anymore, do they? There was a little bit of it when I first started going to kind of international fights, 15, 20 years ago or whatever. You get a bit of that, but you don't really get it now. But the thing is, all these people that are now at ringside, you're seeing them on social media every day, didn't have kind of the same. It would have felt really special back then, because that's the only glimpse you get into these people. You haven't heard of them for ages or whatever. But yeah, it was clearly a big deal, this fight. It's good to see Carlos Monzon. Carlos Monzon is always in there with kind of the discussion when you're talking about the best middleweights in history. And you could see Carlos Monzon always deceptively good, very rarely kind of spectacular, but just so disciplined and knew exactly how to get the best from himself. Carlos Monzon, his shot selection was always excellent. And you could see that. You could see that here. I thought it was interesting as well that you've got on his gown and on his shorts, he's essentially just, there's marketing for this brand new hangover remedy that had come out. And then interestingly, and I didn't realize this until I was doing some research, after the fight, Carlos Monzon kind of fled the scene and was supposed to have a drug test, which he didn't do. And the New York Times at the time is kind of almost just a passing thought at the end of the article is Monzon could face some action for not going through with the drug test. It didn't, not needless to say. But yeah, an early kind of warning about what was to come.
Yeah, interesting. And with Monzon himself, I mean, I know Colin Hart and Alan Hubbard, when I used to have them on the old Box Nation shows, and we do the best of series, and it might be the sort of best foreign fighters or the best middleweights. And I know Colin Hart always rated Monzon. Monzon was always high up on his lists for fighters. And yet, you look through the first 2 or 3 rounds in this one, and the way he, his feet quite flat-footed, quite slow, go back in straight lines, looked a bit clumsy, really, through the first early lines. There are times that Monzon looks like that, looks so beatable. And then you see the Monzon of the 5th and 6th rounds, where suddenly he's slamming that right hand. The 1-2 is so quick, and he puts his punches together in real flowing flurries. And you think, I've just watched 2 different fighters here over the course of 20 minutes.
Well, and that wasn't uncommon for Carlos Monzon fights either. He kind of eases his way into it, sees what Napoles has got to offer, and then goes about his business. He had a really almost ideal frame for a middleweight: broad shoulders, long arms, get some serious power behind, particularly his right hand. And yeah, you can see every time you watch Carlos Monzon fight when he was at his best, you can see why people thought of him so highly. But I must admit, you watch that, and I was watching it thinking, what about Golovkin? How would Golovkin have got on with Carlos Monzon? And I'm thinking, I've been more impressed with Golovkin in recent years than I was here, which probably sounds ridiculous to some of the historians and people that followed boxing in the 70s. But I think we all come from different eras, don't we? And when you're young and something impresses you and you get to witness it from ringside, it has a real impression on you. And I think that's the case with some of the, for want of a more respectful term, the old timers may have experienced with Carlos Monzon when they saw him on the way up.
I don't think that's such a mad thing to say, to be honest, about Golovkin and Monzon. I don't think that's that mad at all. I mean, imagine Hagler and Monzon. Of course, Monzon kind of, he sort of straddled the generations, didn't he? Because he fought Emil Griffith twice, beat Benny Briscoe. He fought quite a few fighters on several occasions. And he'd be out of the ring after this for about 8 or 9 months, Matt, wouldn't he? So Rodrigo Valdez became the middleweight champion, and then Monzon would sort of belatedly win it back a few years later, and he'd have another. I mean, this was his 9th defense. He'd defend it, win it back, and then defend it another 4 times a bit later on. So in terms of middleweight stretches, Hopkins, what was Hopkins? 20 defenses over a decade or something, a bit like Calzaghe. So we've had some long-standing middleweight champions, but Monzon is one of those that does go down in the history books as the sort of guy in his time.
Yeah, and he was, and predominantly he was the guy as opposed to one of the guys. And I think certain people will have problems with Bernard Hopkins being named as the longest reigning middleweight champion and the one that achieved the most successful defenses, purely because for 80 or 90% of that reign, he was only defending one belt, and there were other champions that he was kind of coexisting with. Whereas Monzon was the man during this period in middleweight history. But yeah, Monzon, Hagler, if Monzon could have just hung around long enough and still been effective and still been at his best when Hagler was kind of on the rise, and they almost would have crossed over. It wouldn't have been that much of an outrageous fight to make. But it took Hagler an awfully long time to get his title shot and the respect that he went on to prove he more than deserved.
Yeah, I think Hagler Monzon would have been a great fight. But the finish when it comes, Matt, I mean, he just throws so many. The 5th round is the turning point where he just throws dozens and dozens of right hands, can hardly miss. He just bullies Napoles, doesn't he? And then the 6th, he's a bit better behind the jab, and it's the 1-2 and then the right hand again. And then he starts to throw the combinations in the 6th round. Napoles kind of wobbles back to his corner. He survives the round only just, wobbles back to his corner, and then Angelo Dundee and Ferdy Pacheco, who are in his corner at the time, don't let him come back out for the 7th round.
No, as which was probably the right decision. He ended up taking a bit of a shellacking, didn't he? In the 6th, afterwards, he would claim that Monzon had deliberately gone in with an open glove and jammed his thumb in Napoles' eye, and he spent a large portion of that 6th round being unable to see as a consequence. I mean, I'd read that before I watched it again, and watching it, I couldn't quite see the moment when that might have occurred. That's not to say it didn't, Dundee was talking about it. Napoles was talking about it. Monzon just essentially said, well, I was expecting a hard fight. It wasn't. That was just too easy for me. And Carlos Monzon, what an interesting character. I really like Reg Guttridge's line about kind of the transformation of Carlos Monzon. Like so many fighters came from humble beginnings, and he said about Carlos Monzon that Monzon realized that the quickest way from poverty to plenty is the prize ring. And Carlos Monzon was very much a superstar at this stage of his career. And given what happened to him, he was a superstar in Argentina, but given what he went on to do and what he was kind of doing behind the scenes already, one can perhaps conclude that perhaps fame and fortune wasn't the best thing for Carlos Monzon after all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to separate his professional and personal lives for sure when you're thinking and talking about Carlos Monzon. Good line from Guttridge again on Napoles. He's got the gift of the jab, said Reg in commentary, alongside Gil Clancy. I always like hearing Gil Clancy on comms. And Hegemon Lewis as well was part of the commentary team as well. He was just 6 months away from fighting Napoles, wasn't he? Again, because he'd gone the distance with him in 71, but he'd be stopped by Napoles in 6 months after this. And then he'd be stopped by John H. Stracey a couple of years after that as well. Napoles, Matt, I mean, outstanding sort of championship records, because he won the title 69-70, defended it 3 times, lost it to Billy Backus, then beat him and won it back. 6 defenses in the build-up to this fight. And then he'd have another 4 defenses before he bumped into, famously, John H. Stracey in 1975.
Yeah, and we've just passed the 40-year anniversary of that fight. I think when people, or as we do, when a British fighter heads off to foreign shores and comes back with a world title, there's a temptation then to kind of rank what is the finest away victory by a British fighter. It is sometimes overlooked John H. Stracey getting the better of Jose Napoles, which was should always remain right up there with the best victories by a British fighter. I think we can kind of nitpick and say that Napoles was past his best. He probably was, but he was also a huge favourite going into that. Napoles was a great fighter, one of the best welterweights. I think they said, didn't they, in at this point, that he was regarded as one of the top 3 welterweights in the history of boxing. And I think if people are now to rate the best welterweights, Napoles wouldn't be in the top 3, but I still think you can make a case for it. He was a tremendous fighter, and you shouldn't judge him for this. This really was kind of an expedition up into the middleweight division. He came up against one of the best middleweights in history, and he couldn't quite get the job done. But down at welterweight, wow, he was exceptional.
And it's a North American closed circuit. This is for Reg Guttridge, Gil Clancy, Hegemon Lewis, and there's just little bits where he's so kind of seat of the pants. There's little bits you can hear Reg Guttridge, because there's about 45-50 minute version of this, with a bit of the prelims and the build up and in between rounds, etc. But you can hear Reg Guttridge speaking to Gil Clancy and Hegemon Lewis sort of just off mic, but you can hear it. You hear him saying things like, I'll introduce you in just, I'll introduce you after this. And then there's other bits. They're obviously passing microphones as they're doing it. So it's very much seat of the pants stuff in terms of broadcast production. And the other thing is, you can really hear how relatively young Guttridge is here in 74, and how much more skillful, polished, and brilliant he would become as a boxing commentator in the 80s. And you can really hear how, relatively fledgling he is compared to the caller he would become sort of 5 to 10 years later, Matt, where he was an absolute master of the art.
Yeah, he was, but you can also hear why he would go on to become the master of the art. There's some terrific lines on the spur of the moment. And there's a slight bit of kind of hyperbole where he's saying this is the best fight we've seen since Ali Frazier
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
whatever else, after there'd been just a brief exchange, which was exciting, but at the time, as I've said, at the time, without the benefit of hindsight, without the benefit of the history books, this was two of the best fighters in the sport coming together. So when they're exchanging, it's quite natural that you're going to be excited about it. But yeah, Reg Guttridge, you could hear him kind of saying to Hegemon Lewis, can you just maybe keep score? Maybe keep score.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's another point where he's talking about the best welterweights and the best middleweights, and he's getting a nudge from Emil Griffith. He's like, yeah, Emil Griffith has just jabbed me in the knee. Yeah, of course, Emil is included as well. And so I'd imagine it sounds like it was quite a hectic commentary experience for him, but he does well.
Yeah, fantastic. It is you just a slightly under-polished Reg Guttridge compared to the great caller that he would become. So it's quite an interesting experience to listen to. Well, certainly for me, as a broadcaster, it's quite an interesting experience to listen and hear Guttridge, that version of Guttridge in 1974, and to see the versions of Monzon and Napoles as well. So go back and watch that. Hopefully some fascinating stuff to delve into the history books for you once again. We will get you those interviews coming in the next few weeks as well. We'll get Reece Lynch and Shemaine Lueyo back on the show as part of our Prospects series. And I must have a look and see what all my boxing magazines are, what the years are. My guess is they're sort of the last 15 years, not consecutively, but from the last 15 years of Boxing News, Boxing Monthly, and Ring Magazine. And I will put a thread up for the Patreons for anyone who wants those, or for various people who want or might want to fill gaps in their own sort of program catalogue as well. So let me know. I will promise I will do that for you. And you can have them. You can have them for free, no problem at all. I will sort that. I'll go and try and index through all of those. So look after yourself. Take care. Be good. Bye for now.